When developers start coding with React, they often start with useState or useEffect. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use properly useEffect and when not to use it. And also stay until the end because I'm going to talk to you about the fact that you probably don't need to use useEffect. Okay, so what is useEffect? useEffect, it's a hook provided by React that allows you to perform side effects on function component. For instance, when you want to trigger something when you launch the application, you need to use useEffect. If you want to fetch data when you launch the application or the page, the component itself, you need to use useEffect. If you want to subscribe to observables, you need to use useEffect. And the thing that you gotta know is that useEffect runs after every render by default. So we saw previously on our lesson that React renders every time there is a changes. So you gotta be safe with what you do because you can quickly create a loop and crash your application with useEffect. Okay, so anywhere we need to interact with the DOM, use browser API, fetch data, use local storage, etc., etc. Inside the scope, we require useEffect. So I'm going to come to my home.jsx file. And here, it's the template that I'm going to provide to you at the end of this course, a portfolio. We got our header, but we got this page home that is rendered. And we got this variable name with set name and Guillaume that is rendered. Okay, so here I can import useEffect up here. And I can use it just inside my JavaScript part, inside basically my JSX component. useEffect needs two parameters. The first parameter is going to be the callback, and the second parameter is going to be the array. Let's talk about both. The callback here function, this is the function that is going to be triggered every time useEffect is going to be called. So everything that you're going to write here is going to be triggered. So if you want to just trigger something at the beginning of the application, you need to specify it. If you want to trigger it when a variable is going to change, you need to specify it. And where do you specify it? Inside this array that we got down there. So here I got an empty array, but I could put, for instance, name. And when name is going to change, useEffect will act as a watcher and will trigger here the function that I got here. Okay, so until now it's easy. Let's just give a first example. Let's say that, and I'm going to open my console. I'm just going to console log I am rendered. Let's say that. There we go. We can see I am rendered. So when I launch here the application, we can see I am rendered. We can see that the empty array helps us to trigger the function here, the console log, when the component is mounted. After that, here, it's never going to be called again, except if you render again the page. Okay, so every time I'm going to reload or upload the new page, here we've got I am rendered, that is triggered. Okay, so now let's say that we want to change it only when name is going to change. I can provide here name. So here I just update, just going to save, and we can see here that I am rendered appears, but name didn't change. Well, actually, we called useState here, and we put the variable name here, so we can see that here it's as by default being called. So if I put, if name is different from its actual variable, which is Guillaume, okay, let's say that we're going to console log name variable changed. There we go. So I'm going to save that. I'm just going to render again the page, and suddenly we can see that here it hasn't been called because the variable value didn't change. Okay, so now let's just put, for instance, a paragraph here and a button, okay? And this button would be a change name. So I'm just going to put here an onClick function here, okay? And let's say that I would have a function, okay? So const change name here, and this function would set the name to John instead. All right, so here I'm going to attach change name. There we go. And here, if I click on change name, here we can see that the name changed to John, and we actually the useEffect has been called also, because here useEffect as an observable on name actually is looking for the observable name, sorry. So here we can see that we can actually create sides effects with useEffect on an action. Basically, I wouldn't need that, okay? Here, I wouldn't need this useEffect, but probably for some reason, I want to do something if name change its value. So this is how you would do it. Of course, there is another dumb example here. I'm just going to remove that. But here, let's say that I would like to change the title of my page. So here on the top, you can see that we've got Hello World, which is displayed here. So let's say that next to Hello World, okay, I would have the name, okay? So look at that. Here we got Hello Guillaume. And if I click on John, here we can see that it doesn't change. Why? Because I didn't put the observable. So I'm going to put name. I come back. And here, look, Hello John has changed on the title and it has changed also on the page. So this was a quick example on how to use here useEffect. What I would like to show you also is that inside useEffect you can of course put some kind of cleanup function. So I'm just going to remove that and put the example that I already wrote for you. So I'm just going to come back to it, and there we go. So what do we got in here? Here we've got basically a useEffect which is really complete, and here we can see that we've got a set interval and we got a clear interval, and this interval every second is going to console log tick, as you can see down there, and at the end we've got a return function that clears the interval. Okay, so it's cleaning up, it's a cleanup function on unmount or before the next effect, and the next effect is actually using, it's like a loop, it always look for it. So we've got here 1000 milliseconds, we got this interval and we got this tick running. In this case we are using useEffect to fetch some data and then to assign it to a variable and to render it on our page. So here what we do inside the useEffect, we've got our useFetch function, which is calling an API.example or whatever. And when we get the response, we transform it as a JSON and then we set the data. And until we got the data, we can display basically the loading part. So here, down there in the template, we use the ternary operator to have either loading, either the data that will be rendered. That's another use case when we use useEffect. However, you gotta be safe with that. Why? Because here useEffect cannot be asynchronous. And let's say that we would like to build something like this with an asynchronous function that would await for actually another fetch. The solution to that would be to have some function that itself would be actually asynchronous, and inside we would have our await, okay, with our fetch, and then we're gonna have this await with our fetch. And what we would do, we would remove that and we would call fetch data down there without any async await. You cannot using async await on useEffect. Okay, so here you've got here your function, and then you call your function on useEffect. Of course, you could call your function if we would trigger, for instance, here a button or whatever, which I don't see necessarily why you would do that, because you would have some button or whatever. But it's totally possible. Okay. Okay, we just saw how to initialize useEffect, how to update the state, and how to avoid some side effect. Now I want to talk to you about why you might not need useEffect on your React application. Okay, so what we want to do at first is to avoid unnecessary effects. And those effects should be only used when we interact with externalized system at first. Let me give you an example. So here we've got, okay, props that is passed, and from props we try to catch some initial count, and we would like to pass the count from the parent of home to home, and what we would like to do is to set our count. So here, as we can see, we apply props.initialCount to count. However, here, and we can see here on our JSX part, we don't got any 0 that is displayed. Why? Because there is no initial count on props. We didn't pass anything. So React doesn't render anything on this case because it set a count that doesn't exist. Instead of doing that, what we could do, and let me just show you a basic solution, is to say if there is here the initial count, so conditional rendering, we would like to set the initial props.initial count, and suddenly we can see the 0. Okay, that's not what we want to do. What we would like to do instead, is probably to just apply immediately initial count, so I can remove that. But here you're going to say, hey Guillaume, there is no point to do that because it's exactly what you did before. Look, what you can do here is just to open here as an object your props, and by default put the value of 0. So if I remove that, suddenly I got here my value of 0, and if I pass an initial count, it's going to pass instead of the 0. So here I could put 12, and if I render, we got 12, and there we go. So if from the parent I pass a value, whatever, let's say it's going to be 44k, here it's going to override 44k it's going to override 12 with 44k. So that's the first solution. But try to avoid to use useEffect to pass the props value to your current variable inside your scope. Okay, you should also avoid to transform data in render. Here, what we do, we have a name and a last name, and we've got another user state, which is a string, an empty string, and we use useEffect to set the complete name. This is totally dumb. You don't need to do that. What you can do is to directly here just apply here your name and your last name directly inside here your JSX. To do that, you avoid to create a new loop, a new watcher, and you actually save memory inside your DOM application, inside your browser. Here is another example, but this time with numbers. Here, we want to improve this code because this is a waste of memory. This is a waste of code lines. What we want to do is to remove the unnecessary state, which is here total. So here, exactly like what I did before, instead I can put count plus addition, let's say, and I'm just going to remove that. And I'm going to remove here the useEffect because it's useless to have useEffect. So when I update, we got 20, which is here, count plus addition. And of course, if I would have a button, it would also be reactive, okay? So here we can see again that we don't need useEffect. What we want to do here is to enhance the readability of my JSX. So here we need actually, when we get this, to refactor our code to have something better. We saw that we can use useEffect to watch for some variable state to change and then to trigger some operation. But we can also use useEffect to fetch some data or to interact with our state when a value is changing. However, you should not use useEffect if you want to escape to the mechanic of React and you would like to do something on top of React. This is really bad. It's going to create a lot of mistakes and a lot of errors. Also, you don't want to use useEffect if you want to do some externalized synchronization with some widget networks or whatever. And you don't want to use useEffect if you don't have actually no external system involved. We use useEffect to simplify the code and to add reactivity on top of the reactivity that is already provided by React. The less use of useEffects, faster your code will be and faster your execution will be also.